Hey everybody, welcome to Three Things I've Learned with me, Susan Dolci, where we share the stories that shift our souls. So I want to start today by wishing everyone a happy new year and a blessed 2021. I think most of us are very happy to leave 2020 behind, and I love the potential for transformation that this new year brings. It's kind of like we've walked through the fire, like we've been purified, and it's time to embrace a new energy, sort of like shaking off the energy of fear and embracing the healing energy of love. So if you've been listening to my show these last few months, you know that I've had on several guests chatting about death and grief. A couple months back, I hosted Cindy Kaufman. She's a certified death doula. And then I had Gary Rowe on. He's an author who's written several books on managing grief and loss. And I booked all of these guests long before I knew how intimately they would touch my own life. And again, if you've been listening, you probably know that I lost my mom 2 months ago, and their expertise and empathy truly helped me navigate my own emotions. So we're staying on this topic till the end of this month. And then I'm branching off into a different topic. I promise I'm going to leave the death and grief thing behind for a little while. But today's guest was also booked long before I knew how much I would need her wisdom. I've actually known my guest today for several years, but it was just this last October that I asked her to be on the show. And again, I'm going to say that I feel God had her hand in all of this. So many of us have been touched by death, grief, and loss this year. And I hope that her very special way of understanding this process will bring us all some healing. And disclosure, I might get choked up and teary-eyed once more. But my guest today is Chaplain Candi Wuhrman. She's a board-certified Jewish and interreligious chaplain, spiritual counselor, transformational healing coach, and writer. She holds a bachelor's degree in communications, a master's in spiritual psychology, and a master's in Jewish theology. She has served as a hospice, hospital, and prison chaplain with death, dying, grief, loss, and trauma as her specialties. She now has a private practice in chaplaincy, counseling, and coaching called Sacred Work with Candi. And Candi, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I'm so grateful for your empathy, your wisdom, your knowledge that you've shared with me over the years, and especially over these last few months. Side note, Candi also officiated my mom's memorial service. And so I'm very, very grateful to her. She's an amazing soul. But today we are talking about how grief can actually lead to our healing and spiritual transformation. And when I look at you, Candi, and I see others in your line of work, I'm always in awe of what people like you do, because I really feel it's a special gift. I know I would never be equipped to be able to do the work that you do. So I think it's your story is fascinating, and I think a lot of people are always interested in what brings people like you. Like, how did you learn? When did you learn that this was your passion and this was your gift?
Well, again, thank you for having me, Susan. And it's been, you're going to choke me up because it's been an honor to walk through with you with this experience. And I get that question a lot. Isn't this hard for you? Death and dying and grief and loss. And it's not really hard for me. It's a calling. It's not for the faint of heart. I will say that. But I really would start off by saying that being a chaplain was the farthest thing from my mind, although I was introduced to chaplaincy when I was in the military. And that person was just, to me, the epitome of humanity, just a warm soul, didn't proselytize, just guided me to help me find what I needed. And fast forward 1989, I happened to be with my stepfather when he died. And I really knew nothing about, I didn't even know death intrigued me, but I felt something.
Mhm.
I felt something profound when he died. And then my brother, my stepbrother, and my sister in law, we together from the fourth floor did what Jews do. We have to open the door when someone dies so that the soul can release.
Mhm.
Well, from the fourth floor, we were going for how we did that. It was just piece by piece. And it was that struck me. And there were pieces that started to add up. And then my dad died. And I just have had a comfort level with it.
Mhm. So, as I mentioned in the opener, when I had Cindy on, and she's a death doula, and I mean, chaplaincy. So, also, Candy is in the process of writing a book. We're going to talk about that. But there's one part of the book where you talk about that you sort of are a midwife of death, and that's sort of the same concept as a death doula. But I think the word chaplain, obviously, it comes credentialed. You had to study to get to have that. But how is that different, or what does a chaplain provide?
Well, I want to share a quote with you, and forgive me, I don't remember the reverend that said it, but it said, "A professional chaplain is not someone who leads you to a particular theology,
Mhm.
someone who accompanies you on your spiritual journey,
Mhm.
whatever that is for you." And I think I had shared with you that I had been in recovery quite a while. And that's where I began to develop my own spirituality. And I really was drawn to the journey,
Mm. Mhm.
awakening, the transformation of the spirit through looking at my own inner process. So I also knew I loved healthcare. My
Mhm.
dad was a hospital administrator. I grew up around hospitals. I was intrigued by medicine. I was intrigued. I still do. I feel like the hospital's, a home away from home.
Mhm.
So, and I had been in the military. And so combining all of that to walk through illness, walk through death with the dying process with the patient, as well as with the family,
Mm.
as well as the recovering healing through grief, and then what that's teaching us. And so I always also like to say that it took me years because I counsel, it took me years to realize the difference in what I do versus a therapist.
And what is that? How is that different?
I work with the human spirit.
Mm.
I also work with what I call spiritual injuries. Spiritual injuries are those traumas and those things that have harmed the heart, the
Mhm.
soul, the spirit, have deflated us. So when I work with somebody and being able to put together the puzzle of their life and connect the dots and bring life again, where somebody breathes fully into life, is pretty profound. It never gets old.
Yeah, and what strikes me about what you just said, and so I had the privilege of being able to read the first 4 chapters of Candy's book. You can get, we'll tell you where you can get the introduction, which is just a teaser because it's really, really good. It's a great story. She's a great writer, but it's the process of for the person who's dying,
Mhm.
that process of sort of beginning to shake loose from the physical body to the spiritual one. And then, as you just mentioned, having traumas or spiritual injuries that I think this is when it all starts to come bubbling up. And these things need to be healed before they cross over. Yes.
Mhm. Well, ideally, yes. I mean, one of my hopes is that we begin, like we're doing here, talking about death and dying well before the time comes, um, so that families can communicate about it. I hear all the time, oh, I don't want to say this because I don't want to scare her, meaning mom who's dying. And I can tell you with all surety that you're not going to scare them because they're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
When my mom was declining, this was happening well before it was end of life. Um, I would say easily with a few years,
Oh,
I
yeah.
was watching her decline, and I was watching her retreat inwardly. And from my perspective, that's a spiritual experience for her. This was a woman that didn't talk about God other than, and I write about this in the book, I am woman, hear me roar. I mean, he was in charge. God was taking a little part in that, but I watched her transform to where she would use the name God. And let me say, full disclosure, there are many names or no names.
Mm-hmm.
That happens to be one I use. But it was later that she used that. Um, as far as the trauma, what you asked about, there's a lot now in the clinical world about trauma informed care for us to be aware of the trauma that people hold because sometimes people can become combative and it's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
You're anxious. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just be present for them. And it's a challenging time. I will say that it is challenging, and often, at least with my patients, they haven't had the ability to process that at that time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
cognitively, emotionally. But there's something that's very unique that happens when I sit with people in that loving space and hold that they are, I love to say, I learned in spiritual psychology, we're divine beings having a human experience. We're all spiritual beings. I later learned it in seminary of we're souls first, our body comes later. So just holding that for someone with love, with no judgment, and letting I'm sure if you're listening, you're hearing, you probably heard it where different things that were just random. They didn't seem to make any sense that somebody would say. And they make sense to that person.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to make sense to me. So, um, yeah, I was thinking if I wanted to say any more about the trauma piece.
Well, this would probably be a good time to take a break here in a minute, because what we were talking about is how this is sacred work. This is really, again, why I'm always in awe of people like you who have the capacity to hold that space and to be truly present. Most people don't even know what that means. Um, but when we come back, I'd like to talk. We talked about what the dying person is experiencing, um, but uh, what the family's experiencing as far as grief and loss. And as we talked about, we bring up as anticipatory grief, which I didn't even think about until we talked about it. But we'll talk about that when we come back. We're going to take a break. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci, and we'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Clear my throat. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci, and today I'm talking with Chaplain Candi Wuhrman. She is chaplain, hospice chaplain. She's also in the middle. She's a writer. She's a very, very gifted writer. We were talking about that during the break. And we're talking about um, using grief to transform our lives and go from devastation to fulfillment. And we were talking before the break about how to handle our own personal grief. We touched a little bit, and in the previous shows we've talked a lot about why hospice is important. Like you mentioned in the book, it's kind of because hospice is governed by Medicare. It's sort of this what's the word I want? It's not difficult process, but it's sort of this complicated, messy process where people should hopefully be qualified for hospice long before they actually need it. Like 3 weeks or so. Like I know they try and get people in there at 6 months. Anyway, I digress because of my own
Right.
problems with what happened to me, or my mom, I should say. But I think the beautiful part about hospice and it being introduced early is that it does give the family an opportunity to have these conversations before it gets too late, or before the person has died, or unexpectedly, or they're in the transition period and they're nonverbal. But I would love for you to share more about the grieving process, especially anticipatory grief. I know when we were prepping for the show, I think, I'm still grieving my mom, but I think what kind of took the edge off of my situation is that my mom had dementia. And so I felt like I kind of grieved her twice,
Mm.
because as she started to lose her memory of my childhood and her memory of my kids' childhoods, um, that was almost worse, and definitely more I had a lot of resentment with that grieving period versus her actual death. Um, and there was a lot of bitterness. And so I would just, if you could share, you've got a wealth of experience uh, on how do we take that grief and turn it into something, and transform it.
Well, first, I want to say that, as I mentioned to you, I think before, a big part of a loss is the loss of what you hoped could have been.
That's the truth.
Mhm. And, the title of this talk was stated as From Devastation to Fulfillment,
Hmm.
a spiritual transformation through grief healing. And I want to put in there a disclaimer around that, in the sense of, if devastation is point A and fulfillment's point Z, there's a whole lot in the middle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that pretty much every loss is devastating, and that it's truly painful. It's a loss, and it hurts, and it's messy,
Messy. That's the perfect word for it.
very messy. And I want to honor that pain, because it's real, and there's no quick fix. And so I like to say that grief is the array of emotions that are a response to a loss, and that we have to go through it. We
Yeah.
have to feel it. And I share this in my book. You may remember it. I'm going to call these puddle moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally, I'll say that when I had lost my dad, now 26 years ago, and it was devastating. But it was also, I don't know why at that time, that my dad had ALS,
Mhm.
and yet he died of a heart attack. And so I was able to really recognize, thank you. Thank you, God, that he died of a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
Poor boy, robs your body and leaves your mind. So the grief just was very different. I was at a different place in my life with my mom, who died. It'll be 3 years this month. She was 91. So when my dad died, I was 33. With my mom, she was 91, and I was whatever I was, 56.
56, because I'm 56, and I was like, we got that in common. So
Kind of lose count there after a while,
yeah.
Um, I didn't know how. I knew I worked in this field. I didn't know what I was going to feel.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to grieve, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. And here I was, just out of the shower, completely naked, in tears, not knowing what the heck to do. With all the training I have and not knowing what to do. And thankfully, a friend of mine called and I picked up the phone. And I guess what I want to say about it, before I even talk about the transformation of it, is that we have to feel it. We have to feel it all. There's this, there's this belief that we hold. I say we as a society, that we should be over it in a certain amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
or we shouldn't fall apart, or it's a blessing. By the way, that's the worst thing you can say to somebody who's grieving. It's not compassionate. It's
Mm-hmm.
not understanding at all. So we have to be able to feel it. And from my perspective, being able to see the signs of presence, of their physical presence, of their spiritual presence, to recognize that we go through a transition just like they do, in a sense,
Yeah.
as they transition from physical to spiritual. We are transitioning from knowing them in a physical way to knowing them in a spiritual way.
Okay, now I'm choked up because one of the things like I said, I got to read all 4 chapters. Y'all are going to have to wait till her book is published, but trust me, you're going to want to read it. Where you talk about uh, building that spiritual connection with your mom,
Mhm.
and the hummingbirds, and the number 18, and the Scrabble word,
Yeah.
and uh, the night my mom died, she had a gold necklace on. She's worn this gold necklace for as long as I can remember. And I couldn't get it off. And I asked my husband to take it off. And so I was holding it in my hand, and I came home and I put it on the dresser and I stretched it out flat. So it was like one straight line. And I said, okay, this is how you're going to let me know that you're around, because I know you're just like, right, you're just on the other side of the veil, and I need confirmation because I need to know that you're there. Nothing, nothing,
Mm.
nothing. Finally, after weeks, I picked it up and I put it in a box. And I was watching this one video of some different organization, and she was just, I think she's a psychic, and she was talking about how many people have lost loved ones. And she said, if you've lost a loved one, you know that the spirit goes on, but you need to be patient.
Mhm.
And that's what you wrote. You're like, because I'm just expecting it, like, okay, you've crossed over, you're a spiritual being now, you are, in the arms of God and in love. And why haven't you, what's the problem? Like, I haven't had a dream, I haven't had a sign, and I'm looking for him. I'm like trying to stay open to him. And I love what you said. What do you remember what you wrote? about how, like, it's very busy. You said, like, there was a lot to
Right,
do.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there was a lot to do, uh, after when one crosses over, and I hadn't, like, that didn't even occur to me, and, um, again, when we were talking, I'm gonna tell everybody this, so Candy sent me these 4 chapters, Saturday? And she told me, trigger warning, the first chapter, or that you might get very upset. And I was like, okay, that I understand. Thank you. But I thought, I'm good. It's been 2 months. I'm okay. And I had finished it this morning and I'm sobbing. And I was especially sobbing and touched at that point where you said, um, to be patient and that it's on it's part of my responsibility to help build that connection, where I
yes.
was putting all of the onus on her, like, you need to let me know when you're gonna, you know what I mean? And please share your wisdom on this topic.
Wow, wow. Well, I will say, I'm gonna go backtrack just a little bit. One of the reasons that I feel like hospice is valuable is because hospice has this incredible team with a chaplain and a social worker and a doctor and a nurse and all of the team, right? So these conversations can happen as someone's declining. My mom, however, never really qualified for hospice until after she fell. But I would be in my chaplaincy training years prior, and I'd be in the car. California, you're in the car a lot. So, so I would have these conversations with her, and I said, Mom, when you go, you'll be able to talk to me. Oh, Candy, I don't believe that. I know you believe it. That's okay, but I don't believe that. I'm like, okay, Mom. Fast forward, I reminded her before she died, you'll be able to talk to me. Remember, and mind you, when I say talk, I'll talk about that a little more. It's not like you and I are talking. That's at least my experience. So, whew, I might get choked up. When my mom died, the day my mom died, she was in an end of life home. I went upstairs to do some yoga, and all of a sudden I heard her say, I'm going now, Candy. And I said, okay, Mom. And I happened to know from my professional experience that often parents, particularly moms, would prefer to die alone. Too
Yeah.
painful for them to pass with their children right there. About a minute later, the nurse came up to get me and said, I think you should come. So I did. And then after she passed, and then I was in the shower and go, do you believe me now? She said, yeah. So fast forward after she died, I was writing letter. I was distraught one morning. I write about this in there and I go in the book, I just said, Mom, where are you? Where are you? I want to talk to you. I want to hear you. And I even like talked to my dad, kind of, where, Dad, is she okay? Like, have you seen her? Like, yeah. And my dad says, she's okay. There's a lot to do. Well, I don't know all about that, but I believe that.
Mhm.
And then finally, after I'm like, where are you? She says, I'm here. I'm okay. And this was kind of writing back to me in my writing, my journal. And yeah. And so there were multiple times which you've read some of that in my book where she would write me back.
Mhm.
Um, I will say I'm almost forgotten the question. And the, if it, there was a
Yeah, same, but yeah,
lots
I
of
guess it was just about, like, how. that to be patient, to that I think some of the onus is on us also to be open to that communication and those signs, and truly keeping an open heart that and faith. I guess it's faith
Mhm.
that there is an afterlife. We are eternal beings. um, and that her love for me hasn't gone away. I think the thing I struggle with, and I think what a lot of people
Mhm.
um, this year have struggled with, is so many of our loved ones died alone.
Sure.
And so, like, I didn't have that opportunity to be with her. I didn't have that opportunity to have those conversations with her. um, and even though I've said before, even though it was expected, it was sudden. But there's a quote in your book that, and I'd like to talk a little bit. We're going to take a break again, but I'm going to quote this, and I'd like to talk about it when we come back. And that's, you said, going through painful experiences is not suffering. Suffering is adamantly insisting that you shouldn't be experiencing what's occurring.
Mhm.
And so what that means is our suffering is a choice. And I think that's pretty profound. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. And we also have to share where people can find you, because I'm so caught up in this conversation, I keep forgetting to say where people can find you. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. We are back. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci, and today I am talking with Candi Wuhrman. She is a chaplain, a counselor, a coach, a writer. And before I get on my, I don't want to say soapbox, but caught up in my story again, where can people find you?
You can find me. There's a business page on Facebook, and it's the same as my website. So it's Sacred Work with Candi, or sacredworkwithcandi.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube.
All under that, all under Sacred Work with Candi. Also, if you click on the link in this episode on the Transformation Talk Radio website, that'll take you to a landing page where you can get a free download of the introduction to her book, Moxie. And you can also access that at any time if you go to her website, Sacred Work with Candi. There's a menu tab, and you can also download it from there. And I know I've said this, but I'm going to say it again. Candi, I like she's a very gifted writer, very intriguing writer. I've really felt sucked the right word, like involved in the story. Like, it
Oh,
was just very engaging. It's very engaging. And like I said, I can't wait to read the rest of it. So I don't know when it's coming out, but it's coming out soon. And we all have to just keep cheering her on to finish the book. So, all right. So before we went to break, we were talking about the difference between physical pain and suffering. And I was bold and said, well, that means if suffering means that we're insisting that something shouldn't be occurring, that would mean it's a choice. However,
I think it's more than I think it's different than a choice. I think suffering is real, and I think that pain is real, and the suffering comes from other places. You asked me before, you mentioned the quote that I had in the book about sometimes when we're suffering, it's because we're adamantly thinking it should be different, right? I go on to say in that piece about often families will say to me, oh, I just wish she'd go because she's suffering. Well, sometimes that's accurate. Pain, physical pain at the end of life is very real, but also so is spiritual pain. That people go through a period of life review, they go through a period of wrestling with their life, things that worked, things that didn't work, their behavior. And mentioned this at the beginning of this segment that often they can't tell you about it. So there might be one word or one thing that happens that's part of their reconciliation that eases their way,
Mm,
that allows them to go in and out of lucidity, which many have seen this
mm,
as their soul is traveling at this point. And so this is all part of the spiritual journey. It's the transformation that's happening. My personal belief and professional belief is really that there's something that they have to see on the other side that gives them comfort.
mhm,
That's part of why this journey happens. The other thing I want to say about suffering, I don't want to give the impression that it's just mind over matter. Not going to suffer, not going to suffer. It's a choice. And I think it's more than that. I want to share with you, which I've gotten permission, not that I'll share the name, but with one of my clients, that we have to look at, is there trauma involved? And so I have a grief client that lost her spouse. Um, she she was struggling. She was really, really struggling. Really felt devastated. Just would spiral down and
mm,
felt devastated in her grief. Understandable. She lost her wife. It makes perfect sense. So I could validate that. But as we explored further, she had a twin sister who died at birth. And so that loss was the piece that was really devastating her because that was the loss of connection
mhm.
from her soul. I mean, they were
Yeah,
spirit to spirit when you lose, it's a twin.
right.
And not to mention that she had some guilt around that because she was the B twin.
Mm, mhm,
And she felt like she knew that usually if a twin didn't make it, it was the B twin. We got to work with that and resolve that. That was a piece of that suffering from the current loss, that it got triggered. The other piece with this same client was she's a gay woman, and the relationship of her wife was the first really beautiful relationship with a gay woman and with deep connection. And her fear was that she'd never have that sort of love again.
yeah.
And that was connected to her inner 18-year-old. So we get to connect the dots. And I believe that this is a lot of where suffering can come from. Suffering is different than pain. Pain is it's I think the thing that makes it suffering, which again is very real, it's it's the disbelief.
Mm, mhm.
I can't wrap my head around this. What will my life be like?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, yeah. I think that's profound right there. It's the not being able to wrap your head around it that makes it hard to lean into.
well, and this is why I believe that paying attention to these column signs, um, the pieces that tell me my mom was present, the pieces that tell me there's an ongoing connection, and allowing myself to feel that. This is why I named the book Moxie. It was one of my mom's favorite words. It came up. I shared this about the Scrabble. We played Scrabble. That was what my mom and I did. She always used to get these high words, these points. I didn't know what the word meant. And when I played that word, 2 months after she died one night, and that began to tell me, confirm her presence was here. I almost kind of felt like she was giggling.
She probably was.
I was, and it just gave me comfort, and it went from there, all these different things, and the piece around the moxie was. And it was funny because this morning, of course, I was nervous about this talk show a bit, and I woke up thinking about what I say is the tagline at this point, at least Moxie, finding courage, strength, determination, and love through grief, is what I actually needed today. So I kind of felt that nudge. And I talk about that nudge in
Mhm.
the book, like she's saying, you have this.
Yeah.
Be there, bring it. And she was my greatest cheerleader, and I didn't want to hear it, sometimes,
Yeah.
but, I'm honoring that.
Yeah, it's what I have learned. I have my three things. I was not going to necessarily go through all three, but um, is that I've mentioned in prior shows like this. I lost my brother several years ago to cancer. When he was 53, I lost my dad in 2008. And none of that prepared me for
Mm.
what it's like to lose my mom. And you thinking that I've done this before, I kind of thought I knew what to expect. Um, and that's just not the way it works. And I had an old childhood friend. This was after the Gary Rowe interview, and he sent me an email, and he said he lost his wife several years ago, and he said that it's like grief is like it's sort of like an ocean. It's like, comes in waves, and some days there's going to be some stormy days, and some days it's calm, and you never know when those big waves are going to come and get you and like throw you down and hold you underwater and make you feel like you can't get back up or breathe, and that you just never know what to expect. um, so if I've learned anything from you and from all the people I've talked to the last couple months, it's to be gentle with myself.
Mhm.
um, Grief is a process. It doesn't have a timeline.
Right.
um, and every loss uh, has its own set of rules or game plan, right? The things that it brings up, the things that we have to work through. um, I think that's why this with my mom is so different, right? Because like you read in the book how your mom was imprinted
Right.
on you, on your life, and on every aspect of you, and there's this whole cellular component, and it's just it's a profound
Mhm.
loss.
Yes. And I talk about how we unravel. We have to let ourselves recalibrate.
Mhm.
It's our whole constitution is changing without this person. And I also will say that I've often said we grieve so deeply because we've loved so greatly. But I'll say it even a little differently today. We grieve so deeply because we've been touched so deeply, because sometimes the relationships aren't good. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of different pieces that have to be resolved in order to find our own inner healing, to find our own peace with that relationship. And if I can say anything, talk about these things early on. Talk about it. Talk about your feelings.
Yeah.
But not, we can't really prepare, but we can prepare, and I
Mhm.
talk about that a lot in the anticipatory grief. And listen, I will be the first to tell you, I have not personally experienced a lot, different, all the different types. No one could those. So there are things that I wouldn't know about because I haven't walked through it,
Mhm.
but certainly have walked through a lot with professionally with people. And you're right, every loss is so different, has a real, very different component to it.
Mhm. Yeah.
My prayer is that we can touch in on the ineffable, the things that make no sense, and let them transform us.
Yeah. It's possible. It's possible. Like you've said, you can get from your grief can take you from devastation to fulfillment, but it's going to take some time and a lot of self-love and self-care.
And a lot of puddle moments.
Yeah. So again, people can find you and to work with you. Your website is Sacred Work with Candy,
With a
correct?
candy with an eye. Mhm.
Candy with an I, Sacred Work with Candy with an I.com. And you can download the intro to her book, which I highly recommend. That's free if you go to her website. There's a menu tab. If you go to the episode description here on Transformation Talk Radio, and I'll probably try and put it up on my Facebook page also because I want everybody to grab it. Um, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you
Thank you for
so
having me.
much. I feel so blessed to be able to not only have you as my friend, but to have all of the knowledge and empathy that you bring with you and all the work that you do.
I
Thank you.
look forward to many more conversations about.
Thanks. So we all have a story to tell. We can live in the story or we can transform the story. It's your choice. Change your story, change our world. Thanks for listening, everyone.